Hello, you lovely loyal viewer. I'm Rosemary. Thank you very much for joining me. And I am nosing a whiskey which I probably haven't tasted for getting on for 20 years. I was given this as a present at Christmas, and it's a peaty whiskey. It's part of the original 4 whiskies that were in the Compass Box lineup, and it is the Peat Monster. Now, I know you've been with me on my whiskey journey, so you'll know that I've been a bit kind of hot and cold about peaty whiskies recently. And when you hear about the Peat Monster, you kind of expect it to be brash and straight at you and unsubtle. But this is not the case. And on the nose, yes, of course, the first thing that you get is the aroma of peat in your whiskey. Lovely, smoky. Well, it's not. Is it a bonfire note? No, I don't think it is, because that's quite acidic and it makes your eyes water and all that sort of thing. There's something much more about a smokehouse down at the bottom level about this. There's really nothing brash about it at all. And there is a glorious sweetness to it as well. So, the Peat Monster. We're going to put a picture up for you to see. 46%. A boutique blended Scotch malt whiskey. So there's no grain in this at all. It's all malt, but it's different malts from different distilleries. And please don't leave me, don't be shocked. To me, that makes something that is big and rounded and more than the sum of a single distillery, obviously. So the nose is really lovely. And now I'm going to have my first sip. Right, the first thing that grabs you about the Peat Monster is that it is sweet. And that is lovely because it makes such a fabulous balance with the peatedness of it. Now, I've tasted much more peaty whiskies than this, but it is big and it's a big peat, but it's not overpowering. And that sweetness, along with a bit of a lip-smacking saltiness, which you kind of expect if you're going to the home of peated whiskies, which of course is Islay. Even on my first sip, that whiskey is incredibly stitched together. And as you know, very often I don't arrive at that point in my tasting until I've had a second sip. And the second sip of this really knocks out the high notes of the peatedness and just gives you something like the most delicious baked apple or toffee apple by a bonfire. It's quite extraordinary. You see, John Glaser, who founded Compass Box, was with Diageo for many years. So he knows his whiskies, he knows his distilleries, and he's been round the block a bit and knows who to ask for what sort of packages of whiskey might be lying in small quantities which could never really be released under the distillery's own label, unless it was a distillery exclusive, of course. And John has built the Compass Box brand on that knowledge of how to put whiskies together, just as I, as a cook, know how to put ingredients together. And he has produced some wonderful, wonderful whiskies. So 20 years ago, I first tasted the original range, which was a Seiler, which is a lovely blend of malt and grain whiskies. I've got many people who don't think that they could taste, ever like whiskey, to really enjoy it by giving them a Seiler. Then there's Oak Cross, which is probably one of my all-time favourite whiskies. And that's really interesting because it uses some French oak introduced to the barrel on the tops and bottoms for extra flavour and brings something really, really complex. So those two are the most accessible, I think. And then there's Hedonism, which is a pure grain whiskey and has had some fascinating special editions. And then the Peat Monster. And as I say, I hadn't tasted this for 20 years before I was given a bottle as a gift. And boy, have I enjoyed it. So I've just put some water with it. And that makes a really, really accessible, peated, well peated, strongly peated whiskey. And yes, there's hints of baked apples in the back there, which is really, really nice. And a tad of vanilla. But overall, it's about the peatedness. And 46% ABV, it's a classic, really. You know, you'll get the things like Port Charlotte from Bruichladdich, which I love, actually, as a strongly peated whiskey. And I find that because it's so well matured, I can really enjoy it. And then I did a whiskey video recently of the Benromach 10-year-old, which again, I'd not tasted for some years and was a complete revelation. But I do worry in the current environmental crisis, and let's face it, we are in one, just how the whiskey industry is going to stack up and accept the challenge of change. And I think, now, I don't know, dear viewer, whether you are a boy or a girl, but I think that probably women are going to worry more about the use of peat in the whiskey industry than men. And, you know, please jump in on the comments and let me know what you think about that. The island of Islay says that their peat is sustainable. And I'm only just sort of coming to this debate, really. I'm trying to use peat-free compost in the garden, etc., etc. Where do you think the whiskey industry should go with this? I mean, so the other day I tasted Highland Park's Valfarda, and that's their most heavily peated whiskey ever. And again, like this, it was glorious. It was just so well done, and with aged whiskies. I can't cope with Octomore, which is the heaviest peated whiskey ever, I think. I still have the remains of one of the original bottles of Ailsa Craig, and I might occasionally have a dram of that with a really rich chocolate brownie. But I don't know. Am I stupid in worrying about peat in the whiskey industry? I'm not victimising the industry. I want to know how it's going to go forward, because so many of the great distilleries of our time have based their whiskies on being peated. But until we know the answers to that and we know how they're going to address it, if somebody else gives me a bottle of Peat Monster, I'm going to enjoy it. Very, very much indeed. And when friends come who are absolutely peat heads, I shall try introducing them to this, because I think it will be one for them to try. It will be sweeter than some of the, the Ardbegs, etc. But I jolly well hope they like it, because I do. Cheers! See you next time. Mmm.